Additionally, the USDA claims that it will not use a contingency fund to provide SNAP benefits because it is meant for emergencies like natural disasters. Eric Fleming and 4 other Rawhide actors were dismissed by CBS in one summer in 1965. Clint Eastwood was elevated to the position of leader, but he was not given a raise. The show ended after just 13 episodes. Here's something no one discusses though. Eastwood and Fleming were so hostile against one another that they almost got into a fight in Arizona behind a fence. The producer intimidated Fleming with fictitious screen tests and referred to him as a horrible human being. Fleming drowned in Peru 6 weeks after being fired. His remains were interred in an unmarked cemetery and donated to a medical school. CBS didn't want you to hear this tale. Rawhide was not the result of Charles Mark Warren's accident. He constructed it as if he were a master architect, combining the designs of 3 very different structures to create something that America had never seen before. His own 1958 movie Cattle Empire, in which Joel McCrea led a cattle drive during the Civil War, served as one of his main sources of inspiration. The tone for Rawhide's eventual development was established by that gritty, filthy movie. However, that was insufficient. Most producers would have missed the gold mine that Warren discovered. George C. Duffield's forgotten cattle drive journal from 1866 has been buried in Iowa history since 1924. The trail was not romanticized by Duffield. He told about unrelenting stampedes, dangerous river crossings, even the Red River drowning of a cowboy named Carr. It was unvarnished, which was precisely what Warren desired. His time on Gunsmoke, his ace card followed. He worked on it more than that. He directed the first 26 episodes and produced the entire first season. He was paid $7,000 per week by CBS to do it. Rawhide was more than just a pitch because of the believability. It was a pledge. Westerns dominated network television in 1959. Primetime was dominated by 30 of them. Gunslinging, saddle-riding melodrama made up 8 of the top 10 programs. The Cowboy Gold Rush was something that every network aspired to. CBS already had. They wanted more, but Addy scored with Gunsmoke. Warren's notion was unique since it moved rather than being rooted. Episode after episode of Rawhide marched on across hazardous territory, while other shows parked their ranchers and sheriffs in one town. He promoted realism as a concept. He had the Duffield Notebook to prove it, along with native land tolls, robbers, stampedes, anthrax, and water shortages. There was more to it than a Western. It was a hoof-powered survival tale. Warren originally intended to call it Cattle Drive. His show required some bite in a sea of shows like Bonanza, Maverick, and Gunsmoke. He thus modified it to Rawhide. That word struck a deep chord. It lingered in your memory and snapped like a whip. It went beyond branding. It was dangerous. After hearing that once, you would realize that you were going to have a difficult time. Additionally, the title was effective. Rawhide made its debut on January 9, 1959, and immediately made it into the Nielsen Top 20. Executives at CBS didn't hesitate when they saw Warren's name associated with Rawhide. This man was responsible for making Gunsmoke the most popular show in America out of a radio drama. Not only did his idea work, it revolutionized television. His fingerprints were all over the success of Gunsmoke, despite the fact that he quit it in the middle of the second season due to a disagreement with co-producer Norman Macdonald. The network didn't need persuasion when he presented Rawhide. They wanted it again because they recalled what he had done in 1955. Gil Favor's tough exterior wasn't always Eric Fleming. As a 17-year-old Navy CB during World War, the second Fleming nearly lost that face in 1942 after placing a foolish wager. He made a disastrous attempt to raise a 200-pound weight. It crushed his face, shattering his nose, jaw, and forehead. Major reconstructive surgery was performed on him. Ironically, he developed the rugged, remarkable features that would eventually earn him the lead in Rawhide from the same injury that nearly ended his life. Wonderful balance of values, he said. He appeared to be the type of man who could guide 3,000 cattle across wild terrain because of that injury. Polish wasn't the reason Clint Eastwood got the part. The script for his 1958 audition called for him to burst into frame and lash out at no one. The issue was that he failed to commit the lines to memory. Rather than retreat, he took a risky decision. Without uttering any of the dialogue, he rushed in and improvised the entire scenario, screaming with unadulterated passion. There was silence in the room. Charles Marcus Warren, the producer, looked at him as if he were crazy. Eastwood believed he had blown it. He informed his wife at home that he had lost the position. He would understand, she said with a smile, and she was correct. He was chosen because he was genuine. His flawless performance was surpassed by his improvisation. Warren, however, was merciless behind the camera. He surreptitiously brought in actor Gregory Walcott for a screen test during season 1. Walcott was unaware that the test was for leverage rather than a role. Warren needed a negotiating chip since he was tired of hearing Eric Fleming whine all the time. He never intended to hire Walcott, but he used him as a tacit threat to replace him. It was the kind of blatant deception that typified Hollywood in the 1950s. In 1961, Warren finally left the program to pursue new endeavors, including The Unsuccessful Gunslinger and The Virginia. Despite winning the role of Rowdy Yates, Clint Eastwood detested the character from the start. He was portrayed as an impetuous teen at the age of 28. He called it the Plains Idiot. He didn't like the childish writing. He preferred grit above silliness. Even Paul Bringar, his co-star, expressed his dissatisfaction with Eastwood's portrayal of a youthful, impressionable character. In 1964, Eastwood accepted Sergio Leone's invitation to Italy as a result of this friction. Spaghetti westerns provided him the opportunity to be taken seriously, which was what he sought. The writing wasn't the only source of tension on production. Eastwood and Fleming clashed violently. They simply detested one another, according to several members of the cast and crew. During filming, some even reported getting into a fist fight. Fleming was described by Warren as a giant egotist. The majority of the crew didn't like him. Fleming drowned in the Haga River in Peru while filming a movie in 1966. Eastwood softened in public. He denied that the altercation ever took place. Perhaps it was a matter of respect, perhaps guilt. It could be Hollywood smoothing things out. Rawhide was not intended to be a juggernaut when it debuted in January 1959. It was replaced in the middle of the season. However, after only 23 episodes, it was the 18th most watched program in America by the end of its original run in July. After a successful run, CBS peaked at number 6 in the Nielsen ratings for the 1960-61 season, immediately behind Wagon Train and Gunsmoke. Every Friday night, Rawhide reached 12 million households. It had 217 episodes over 8 seasons, all in black and white. The sincerity was what set it apart, not just the action. Gil was more than simply a cowboy in Fleming's favor. History had molded him into a man. His persona was based directly on George C. Duffield, the actual cattleman whose diary from 1866 served as the foundation for the program. Every episode had realism influenced by that diary, including Fleming's monologues that echoed entries in the Trail Journal. Fleming's involvement in the plot was evident in the fact that he created 2 episodes himself and was channeling history in addition to acting. Rawhide explored topics that challenged convention when other westerns stayed safe. Robert Culp played an ex-soldier who was addicted to morphine in one episode. Another used the character of Jesus to directly depict racism. There were accounts of quarantines due to anthrax concerns, Aboriginal tribes negotiating land passage by demanding cattle, and Confederate sympathizers attempting to instigate a fresh uprising. It was genuine, unclean, and unpleasing. Sheb Wooley was simultaneously riding 2 wild horses in 1958. On one side, a silly novelty song called The Purple People Eater had gone viral on radio, selling over 3 million copies and holding the top spot for 6 weeks in a row. It was never intended to be successful. Only after his somber ballads were disregarded had he performed it for MGM executives. With the exception of 2 men in the room, the majority of them laughed it off. The president was one, the head of A&R was the other. All he needed was that. Wooley was discreetly filming the part of Pete Nolan on Rawhide, a gritty Western series that would go on to become iconic in its own right, while the world danced to his strange, one-eyed alien anthem. Woolley was already well known across the country when Rawhide debuted in January 1959, making more money from a single novelty song than most performers did in a season. However, the most intriguing aspect wasn't the money, not even close. Behind the easy smile and cowboy hat lay a secret that would reverberate across Hollywood for decades. While filming the movie Distant Drums in 1951, Woolley captured a single, unadulterated, frightened, and unforgettable scream. It was thrown into a sound archive with the title, "Man Being Eaten by an Alligator." The fact that this scream would be included in more than 400 movies, including Star Wars, Indiana Jones, and The Lord of the Rings, was unknown at the time. The Wilhelm scream would go on to become the most well-known sound effect in Hollywood, and no one recognized the voice as that of Chev Woolley. He received no credit. He didn't require one. His widow verified the rumor years later. He had always jokingly claimed to be skilled at dying on TV. As he rode with Clint Eastwood and Eric Fleming, Chev Woolley was tearing up the country music charts. But America perceived him as a tough trail scout. That's My Paw peaked at #1 on Billboard's Hot Country and Western sides in March 1962. It cracked the Hot 100 and remained on the charts for 17 weeks. This was a second act that most musicians could only imagine for a man who had already topped the charts with a flying purple monster. He had the stamina to recast himself as a bona fide country performer, despite working long hours on Rawhide. Few people were able to simultaneously straddle two entertainment domains. Without flinching, he did it. Then Hee-Hi-Haw appeared. Woolley composed the theme song for a brand new, unanticipated country comedy variety show in 1969. He recorded the theme by bringing in country and town vocalists, which he later termed the Nashville Edition. It would run for 25 years. Woolley's influence extended beyond the music, playing regular comic routines and portraying his inebriated alter ego, Ben Sur. He joined the cast on day one. What began as a ridiculous joke character evolved into several CDs and a traveling act. After one hit, most actors start to fade. Woolley continued to construct more ones. At once, a serious cowboy, a comedic sensation, and a successful songwriter. Furthermore, he wasn't acting like a cowboy. He was one. Grew up in Eric, Oklahoma, on a farm. Long before there was a camera aimed at him, he was roping livestock and riding bulls. He was already traveling the professional rodeo circuit as a youngster, getting busted up, injured, and tossed. He attempted to enroll at the start of World War II but was turned down. He worked at armaments industries after being classified as 4F due to injury sustained while rodeoing. All of those scars were subtly sewn into the rawhide and incorporated into his rifle shooting and saddle holding techniques. That level of grit is impossible to fake. However, leather was more than simply dust from the desert and cattle runs. Incident at the Top of the World, one of the show's most audacious TV episodes at the time, broadcast on January 27, 1961. A Civil War soldier who was struggling with morphine addiction was portrayed by Robert Culp. The subject was so controversial that CBS almost canceled the show. This was the first time drug withdrawal was depicted in America, and not on a family program. It received an 8 from viewers. 1 star, astonished but captivated. It was no longer merely a Western. It was cowboy boot-clad social commentary. They continued to push limits. Woody Strode played Corporal Gabe Washington in Rawhide's Incident of the Buffalo Soldier, which aired just 3 weeks prior on January 6. Racism wasn't the only issue. It was about racism with two sides. Black soldiers mistrusted Washington, and white soldiers discriminated against him. His sad demise at the hands of white troops who failed to comprehend his intentions marked the story's conclusion. The year was 1961. It was the height of the civil rights movement. CBS feared that viewers in the South might boycott. Rather, the episode's nuanced depiction of a man torn between two cultures led to its study by academic institutions years later. And that gamble paid out. With a 27.5 Nylon rating for the 1960-61 season, Rawhide was among the top 6 American television programs. The most popular was Gunsmoke. Number 2 was Wagon Train. even when tackling subjects that others shunned, such as Incident on the Edge or Incident of the Slave Master, in which a Union widow murders a former Confederate officer who oversaw a cruel jail. Rawhide stood face to shoulder with giants. A delusional former commander attempts to establish a new Confederate army in Panama in the film of Madness. These were not only contentious incidents. While the majority of TV acted as though they didn't exist, they dared to expose ancient scars, and neither race nor conflict was the end of it. It also extended to gender politics. Lead actor Eric Fleming wrote the script for A Woman's Place, which was released in March 1962 and featured a woman opposing the trail's harsh male hierarchy. The love interest wasn't her. The system was in danger because of her. By November 1965, a widow was in charge of a feminist uprising against dishonest saloon owners in another episode, Clash at Broken Bluff. Free beer and equipment were given to the guys in exchange for voting against women's rights. While some did, others did not. However, it had viewers choose a side, which wasn't typical of television in the 1960s. These were powder kegs, not safe stories. Fleming's presence dominated the set from the first day. He was more than just a celebrity. He hung over every scene like a thundercloud. Charles Maris Warren, the producer, was unable to conceal his contempt behind closed doors. For reasons other than his performance, he once referred to Fleming as a horrible human being. Every script and every choice was dissected by the man. Warren lost his temper. He asked actor Gregory Walcott to participate in fictitious screen tests, implying that he might take Fleming's position in a move that conflates cunning with cruelty. It was all theater. In actuality, the part was never going to go to Walcott. All Warren wanted was for Fleming to perspire. Walcott acknowledged years later that the sting persisted, particularly after Warren chuckled about the entire act. By 1965, Fleming might have been earning $220,000 annually. Money didn't soften his edges, but it was a huge amount for TV at the time. It did nothing but increase the anxiety, which escalated before any of the episodes had even aired. Fleming and a teenage Clint Eastwood almost threw fists during that sweltering summer of 1958 in Arizona before the cameras had even begun to film. Their dispute got out of hand so fast that they had to resolve it like cowboys from behind a fence. Taller and more erratic, Fleming later acknowledged that he retreated. It was calculated, not out of fear. He claimed that Clint would have killed me. The bout was postponed. The air never cleared, but it also never happened. The tone was set at that point. Anger lurking beneath the surface, ready to explode. Even the workers sensed it. Playing the cook Wishbone, Paul Bringar kept his head down and his mouth shut. He had witnessed the harm caused by Fleming's incessant complaining. On set, each day was like navigating a minefield. A plan was in Brian Agar's mind. Enter, work quickly, leave, if at all possible, complete a week's worth of scenes in a few days. Thank heavens that he wasn't the star. Pete Nolan's scout, Chev Woolley, developed a strong bond with Breyer in the meantime. Their bond served as a buffer against the insanity. However, something broke when Woolley left in 1962 after 102 episodes. The network of support broke down. Despite this, Fleming continued to threaten to resign. His emotions fluctuate like a gate in a tempest. It was more than just the suspense, according to Clint Eastwood. The role itself was the problem. He was 28. However, he was made to play Rowdy Yates like a teenager by CBS. He nicknamed him the Plains Fool. Under that cap, Eastwood was boiling. As a child, Clint detested being cast, as Brinegar recalled. By having Fleming and Eastwood take turns in the major parts in 1961, the producers attempted to diffuse the tension. It made a small but insufficient difference. Eastwood was promoted to trail boss in 1965 when Fleming was sacked, but it was too late. Without its initial rough core, the show fell apart. CBS canceled. The man who took Fleming's place was unable to save Rawhide after just 13 episodes of the last season. Not even Eastwood was able to. Rawhide has actually been bleeding for years. It proudly held the 6th position in the Nielsen ratings at its height. That was from 1960 to 1961. However, it dropped to 13th position the very next year, then 2020, and finally, 44th. With 38 spots in just 3 years, the decline was severe. The scripts were outdated, people stopped watching. Friday evenings were no longer the same. Similar to Tumbleweeds, producers came and went. After season 3, Warren departed. Andre Boheme, who took his position, attempted to keep the ship afloat for season 4, but was also replaced quickly. Seasons 5 and 6 were taken over by Vincent Fenley. Then, midway through season 7, Bruce Geller and Bernard Kowalski were sacked. Then Boheme came back. There was mayhem. Action was the focus one week and family turmoil the next. Should they highlight guest stars or cattle drives? No one was aware. The soul of the show vanished a bit more with each new producer, who brought with them new orders. Then came Death Blow on CBS. Rawhide was relocated from its devoted Friday at 7:30 p.m. slot to September 1965 Tuesday evenings. The audience was devastated by that one choice. Consistency had been key to the show's success. It was common for viewers to begin their weekends with Rowdy Yates and Gil Favor. They were no longer even able to locate them. The last episode of the series aired only 3 months later. Season 8's remaining 13 episodes staggered over the screen, a far cry from the 30 episodes in Season 7. The performance was over. In 1966, the final replay was on January 4th. CBS was reinventing itself behind the scenes. Westerns were expensive. Sexy sitcoms were popular. The Beverly Hillbillies were now well known. The Andy Griffith Show drew larger audiences and was less expensive. All of this was a part of what would become known as the Rural Purge. Rawhide was no longer appropriate. It was a relic. Costs were rapidly increasing. Each episode of the Virginia cost $330,000. Wagon Train even cost $100,000. Rawhide was unable to follow. Season 8 introduces Robert Thompson. Slash costs with a single work. His remedy? Get rid of the costly ones. Fleming had left. Rocky Shahan, Robert Cabal, James Murdoch, and Chev Woolley were also two complete outsiders to the Western world. David Watson and Raymond Street Jacques entered. The audience seemed perplexed. The chemistry was disrupted. Despite being promoted to lead, Clint Eastwood, aged 35, did not receive a raise from CBS. At the beginning, he had made $750 per episode. Nothing had changed. In response, he asked TV Guide, "Why should I be pleased?" For the same amount of money, he was suddenly carrying the entire show. However, Clint had already filmed for a few more bucks on top of his fistful of money. He was aware of the impending event. He was on the verge of abandoning television. On August 17, 1966, Eric Fleming arrived in Lima in search of a final opportunity at Atonement. Despite making $200,000 in his first year, he was fired from Rawhide. The actor, 41, had recently lost the part that made him famous. CBS sought to reduce expenses. Ian Fleming, who portrayed Gil Favor, the trail boss, for 217 episodes, was just too costly. He was now trying to film High Forest, a 2-part drama that MGM planned to spin into a European theatrical release when he was deep in the Peruvian forest, 4 hours away by bus from the closest sign of civilization. It was a risk. This wasn't Hollywood, the threats weren't fictitious, and the rainforest was genuine. Days before departing, Fleming had made plans to wed Miss Pennsylvania 1962 Lynn Garber. Since 1963 they had been inseparable. That union never took place. The Halaga River's rapids served as the set on September 28, 6 weeks into the production. Fleming and his co-star, Greek actor Nikos Minardos, pushed off into the water after climbing into a dugout canoe that was nothing more than a hollowed-out tree. This was the culmination, yet the waves were rough. An accomplished swimmer and surfer, Fleming made a choice that would ultimately lead to his death. He sprang into the water, intending to swim to shore, rather than remaining with the canoe as directed. The canoe overturned. Minardos was flung around and barely made it out alive. Fleming was not as fortunate. In an attempt to save him, a local man dove in and grabbed his hair, but the river's pull was too much. Only 220 miles northeast of Lima, Fleming disappeared under the foam, drawn beneath the surface. There were 3 or 4 days. After being flown back to Lima, and then to Los Angeles, the crew had already left. The flood had beaten his body when the local villagers eventually located it. The official condition was stated as mutilated and drowned. Just the forest and a dead body dragged from the current. No cast, no crew, no funeral rites. MGM terminated High Jungle by October. The video would never be seen. A life was lost in the process of attempting to rescue a career. However, it was not the end of the story. Decades later, a coroner's report in Caritas magazine stated that Fleming's remains was given to the University of San Marcos Medical School in Lima, San Fernando. After being utilized for research, it was burned. Presbro Maestro Cemetery is thought to have housed the ashes in a communal burial. According to his will, Fleming requested that his eyes and body be donated to UCLA, but there was no paperwork in the woods. His name is not engraved on a headstone. The sixth celebrity who required 4 plastic procedures to reconstruct his face is not remembered by any shrine. Following an accident during the war, he went on to become one of the most well-known figures on American television. He vanished into quiet, then into the water. Without him, Rawhide fell apart back in the United States. In addition to Fleming, Sheb Wooley, James Murdoch, Robert Cabal, and Rocky Shahan had also been sacked by CBS. The network brought in 2 newcomers, Raymond Street, Jacques and David Watson, and elevated Clint Eastwood to the position of director for the summer of 1965. Season 8 was a complete bust, with only 13 episodes, a 50% decrease from the previous season's 30. The audience wasn't duped. The ratings plummeted. Cartoon drawings replaced real cowboys in the new title sequence. Even Eastwood didn't agree with the writer's attempts to completely change the spotlight to Rowdy Yates. "Why should I be happy?" he told TV Guide. "Half the shows used to be carried by me. I now pay the same amount for all of them." Crossing at White Feather, the final episode aired on December 7, 1965. Just another Tuesday night western, with no announcement or farewell. In January, there was one more episode. However, it was a replay. The time slot went to a chimp named Judy, a croziered lion named Clarence, and a family-friendly show about African wildlife called Dari. In its second season, Dictari soared to the Nielsen Top 10. Rawhide was